good at it. We have people coming from all over the world. This year I have people from Poland and Spain and Argentina, a few more others, that come to study what we do. And so we transcend that. And that brings me to my final slide, is what you've heard from all of our speakers is that our food comes from someplace else. And what the United States has is very little of the food that we eat, and that's what my slide is showing you, is where all these different foods come from. But what we do have is excellent technology, not just to preserve that germplasm, as my facility does, but also to breed it. And so the United States, even though we are germplasm poor in terms of food, we have a lot to be proud about in terms of contributing to the food of the world. Thank you.
Don't you love that slide? In fact, we love it so much, we're going to leave it project as I invite our speakers. All please come up so that folks can now ask questions. So our panelists are going to actually seat themselves up here. Come on down. And you can actually do a mental test for these folks and sit in the wrong seat and see if they actually realize. No, we wouldn't do that. So, this is the moment of truth. It's your turn to ask questions of our experts. This is an unusual. I've never been in at an event with this much expertise gathered that would address the questions that you're now going to ask. So, questions, please. And I think there are people with microphones around. So, just raise your hand, we'll give you a microphone. This question right over here. Where's my there? Yes, sir.
Hello. Okay. I guess this is for anybody up there, but what do y'all think about incorporating a different kind of plant that hasn't really been talked about, a teff, as far as for a more sustainable population kind of food product?
Okay. I haven't visited Ethiopia. I have seen teff. It's like anything else. It certainly will have a market. You know, it'll probably come in through an upscale market first. If you're familiar with plants like quinoa,
Yeah.
That's an Andes plant. It's rarely used, rarely produced in this country, to the best of my knowledge, but it has a market in certain high fiber cereals. I think teff could do that. If you've ever looked at teff, it's a very tough plant to domesticate. And I have students who actually were with the teff program in Ethiopia and then switched to wheat. And the problem is it's shattering. Teff has a seed that's smaller than the tip of your pencil. And it shatters. You can imagine to harvest it is just awful. So it's the national crop and the most valuable or the most honored crop in Ethiopia, but it'd be hard to move to our intensive agriculture.
Yeah, so you think domestication of it would be pretty hard to...
Well, it's difficult to say it's not domesticated because it is widely grown in Ethiopia, but it's domesticated for an agricultural system that we would probably not accept.
Yeah.
That's where I would put it.
There was a question over here before. We can get a microphone. Yes, sir.
I'd just like to follow up on this question. There's a pretty active society in the United States, but also globally, about specialty crops and the development of crops that that aren't our basic corn and soybean. And in the United States, a lot of the interest in those are oil development, not so much nutrition. Americans have plenty to eat. But we do want to reduce our dependency on tropical oils. So we're doing a lot of work on specialty crops. We do want, as Steve said, the rubber industry. So looking at guaioli and some others. So there is a lot. It probably wouldn't be tech per se, but a lot of interest in bringing in crops that are things that we have never used before. But for American interests, like tropical oil, reduce our dependency on tropicals.
Yeah.
Okay, let's do the question over here.
I'd like to speak, somebody on tomatoes speak to the genetically to the different personalities of store-bought tomatoes and ones that are homegrown?
That's true.
Right, right. Well, you remember the quote about true love, right? Right. So many of our tomatoes in the stores are harvested before they're truly ripe, and so that is a major, major factor. Here in Colorado, actually, I've had a much better experience personally with store-bought tomatoes because they're places that are grown using the heat from what is it? The power plants. Yeah, yeah. So we actually have a better quality of stored tomato here in Colorado than I have experienced elsewhere in the United States. But there's nothing to compare with homegrown tomatoes. If you're going to grow one thing, you should grow tomatoes in the summer.
A quick comment, because tomatoes are primarily a sensory food, and this is what I deal with grapes and wine as well. And we tend to care more about ripeness and quality of something that's a sensory food. And unfortunately, our food system is geared toward portability and distribution. And the cardboard tomato is the result of that. And, you know, hopefully we can go backwards from there.
We have a question. Great.
This question is for Steve. Why, it's kind of a two-part question. Why do people develop wheat allergies, like with gluten and things like that? And maybe you can step back and answer the question. A lot of the origins that you showed were places that humans hadn't evolved. And humans evolved in Africa and moved out. So consequently, they hit, as you quoted, hit many of these areas where they didn't know what the plants were. So is the gut of a human, was it pre-adapted? Did we have to adapt? And could some of the modifications that we're seeing now today that produce allergies be the changes in the gut?
Okay, for those of you that may not have heard it, it relates to celiac disease, which is an allergen. It's actually not truly an allergen. It's an uptake problem that the gluten doesn't cross the intestinal wall, is my understanding. It's not an area that I'm a specialist in. And the question is that due to humans evolving from where wheat wasn't? You know, if humans came out of Africa, which at least most of us agree to that, they wouldn't have seen wheat. And so they wouldn't have consumed it. You know, their progenitor species wouldn't have had any familiarity with it. It would have come north, basically, and run into wheat. So, you know, it's an interesting question. Is it sort of a vestigial issue, which I'm not confident to reply. The question then becomes is, can we do something about it? Because, you know, it's 1 out of every 400 Americans, I think 1 out of every 400 people globally have some form of celiac. Now, it varies, and it varies from extreme. I once ate lunch with the Secretary of Agriculture for Western Australia, the largest wheat producing part of Australia, and he has celiac disease so severe that if there's any flour, he can't eat it, okay? Scott Haley knows Dave Green at ADM very well. His wife's a celiac, and she eats a roll once in a while, because she just can't not eat a roll, but it makes her sick. You know, it's one of those things where she just, you know, she can't do it. The difficulty is if we bred out the gluten, we would probably breed out the bread-making qualities. So there is actually a very large NSF grant with a fellow by the name of Dieter von Wetzstein, who's going to try and knock out use to knock out the allergen. What I don't know is whether or not that will knock out the functionality. And it's you know, it's too bad. But it's interesting, you know, coming back to the origins of humanity, the substitute for wheat is sorghum, which would have been a crop that humans, as they evolved, would have come into contact much earlier. It's an interesting question.
Anybody else on the panel? Comments? More questions, please. Yes, back here. If we get the microphone over here, it'd probably be easier. Could you? Oh, you.